Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Simmons, president of Astronomers Without Borders, and I'd like to welcome you to this very special Hangout event, Hangout on Air. We are talking about basically looking at the sky from Earth and looking back down and what that means for us. And Astronomers Without Borders is based really on that idea. So I'm delighted to have people with us that we do today. I'd like to introduce the two that we have with us so far. Anusha Ansari, I know, is traveling someplace around the world and may not have been able to come in, and maybe she'll join us before too long. But I would like to introduce the two important guests that we have right now. Frank White first published The Overview Effect, a book by that name, in 1987, and he's authored an additional 9 books since then. It's recently released in its 3rd edition, and the overview effect, as well as the term the overview effect that he coined, has been highly influential in discussions on the nature of space exploration. And Frank continues to be a leading thinker and advocate on the topic of space exploration and its impact on human thought and society. In 2008, he co-founded the Overview Institute to communicate the nature and psychological impact of the space experience to the space community and the general public. General public. And I'm proud to say that I'm a member of the founding Overview group as well. And Frank joins us from his Florida refuge from the snow in Boston at the moment. Also, we have Ron Garan, who is a retired astronaut who traveled 71 million miles during more than 2,800 orbits of our planet. During 178 days in space, during his 2 space missions, Ron logged 27 hours in the vastness of space during 4 spacewalks. He's also an aquanaut, having spent 18 days on the bottom of the ocean during a research expedition in a unique undersea research laboratory. So he's been to both extremes. Ron is a serial social entrepreneur. He's founded and co-founded several organizations that work towards such goals as bringing clean water to millions of people and encouraging and expediting collaboration. His latest effort is based on the Orbital Perspective, the view he developed during his time in space, and his new book by the same name is the call to action for people worldwide to step back and take the orbital perspective, recognizing that through collaboration we can solve many of the world's most pressing problems. And he expresses this view simply as the key is we, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Ron joins us from his home in Houston. So welcome. These are a couple of my favorite people in the world, and one above the world, I guess, so I'm delighted to have everybody here today. I'd like to start with Ron Garan, whose new book, The Orbital Perspective, has caused quite a stir. And Ron, you've become a really, really busy guy since returning back to Earth the last time.
Yeah, I have, Mike. It's it's one of the things I brought back from space was this call to action, this call to spread this view that we have when we look at our planet from space. This view, if you look at it figuratively, that you don't have to be in space to have this big picture view, this long-term big picture view. And so I've been spending the majority of my time on trying to spread that awareness, spread that message, because I think that message can have a profound positive effect on our global society.
Absolutely, and your work is sort of an extension of what Frank has always talked about with the overview effect, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it also struck me immediately when I knew you had big things coming this year. You alluded to it previously, but when I saw what it was about, I was really excited because we try to take the same view in Astronomers Without Borders. The idea is we connect people from around the world and we can do things together, but also learn about each other, and this is a big part of what we do, to learn about each other so we don't have ignorance about other places, fear of other people, and so on. And this is an important part of getting the orbital perspective, being able to get past those provincial ideas and trust people. And you talk a lot about trust and the importance of that and the difficulty in the past with some activities. Can you talk about that?
Oh, about trust? Yeah, I think one of the secret sauce that made the International Space Station Partnership work, and realize, if we take a step back, The International Space Station is arguably one of the most complex, complicated structures ever built. It was built in space by 15 different nations, as we all know. Some of these nations weren't always the best of friends. They were on opposite sides of the Cold War, opposite sides of the space race. And what made the partnership work, what made this amazing a human accomplishment come to pass, the secret sauce of that was the personal trust that was built among the various members of the team. The personal trust that developed into organizational trust. And I think that was the first step. But in order to make personal trust possible, you have to have personal relationships. So what that speaks to is the fact that we decided that there was something we agreed upon, and that was space exploration, and we decided, hey, let's work together on that. And because we decided to take that step, personal relationships developed, trust developed, and now we have this amazing platform, this amazing infrastructure, this amazing partnership that we can go anywhere in the solar system with right now. And so one of the main points of the book, of the Orbital Perspective, is that if we can take that same level of collaboration and cooperation that built the International Space Station and bring it down to Earth and put it in the context of our rapidly developing, hyper-interconnected global society, we can accomplish anything. We could solve the problems that we face here on the planet by using that same mindset.
Absolutely, and essentially that's what we're doing as well in AWB, is connecting people together. My effort started by connecting people in Iran and the U.S. during some very bad times, based on astronomy, which is something that's universal, and we look up and we both see the same sky. I see the same sky when I'm in Tehran. It's one of my favorite countries to go to, but there is so much ignorance about the countries on the other side, and therefore a lot of distrust. So it seems that just getting to know each other goes a very, very long way towards making things happen.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of your motto, the motto of Astronomers Without Borders, is one people, one sky. The flip side of that coin is one people, one Earth. So,
Exactly.
I mean, they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and in fact, we did a little transformation in the title for this Hangout, One Earth, One Sky, because it really addresses both of us here. So your experience, you say that that this did not come as an epiphany, that you came to the realization of what this means and the significance of what you were experiencing in space, not just all of a sudden, wow, that's it, but something that developed over time.
Yeah, I call it an epiphany in slow motion. And there were a lot, watching the planet from space for months on end. When you put it into that context, it wasn't born out of a single flash moment, but there were flash moments along the way in the context of those months in space that I think didn't make a big difference. One was photographing the illuminated man-made border between India and Pakistan from space. That had a huge impact on me. Another one was photographing the Mediterranean on a beautiful day and being just mesmerized by the deep blues of the Mediterranean against the reds and tans of North Africa, with the thin layer of atmosphere and the curvature of the Earth, and just being mesmerized by that. But then if you zoomed into the microscopic level of that picture, which was taking on the day that Tripoli fell during the Libyan civil war, and Libya is perfectly framed in the picture, if you zoom into that microscopic detail, the situation is not as beautiful as it appears from space. And so, that sobering contradiction was really, really apparent, so apparent, in fact, that it was like a punch in the gut when you think about it, when you have a moment to think about the implications of what that means. And so, I think there were moments along the way, like those moments that I just described, which kind of contributed to this epiphany in slow motion.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an example from Frank's book. I want to ask Frank about it as well, because Frank, the overview effect. Now, this is based on your interviews with now up to, in the third edition, of 29 astronauts on the impact of space travel and looking at Earth. And one interesting thing that I've learned in talking to you, it isn't looking down at Earth in the way we see it through a camera. It's seeing Earth as a planet hanging in space, seeing the larger context. So it isn't just about the lack of borders, although that's not entirely true, as Ron points out. And you know, Ron says that it's something that it took him a while. You give the example of people going to the Grand Canyon and seeing it for the first time, and it's just our brains don't really comprehend the vastness of it. But I think
Right.
that's something that takes time as well, and that when we go and visit for the third time and the eighth time and the 12th time, we're probably learning how to process that and understand it, what it is, because it's outside of our experiences. That have you found the same thing with the astronauts that you've interviewed?
Yes, I have. I think that it's important to realize the overview effect is not only a concept and a term, but it's a theory. And it's actually based on an experience I had flying cross country. And I think it was a mild version of the overview effect. But I was pondering what it would be like to live in space settlements permanently at that time. And the insight I had was, well, these people will have an overview all the time. They will take for granted things that's taking us thousands of years to grasp from the surface. And I didn't necessarily describe it as a mind-blowing experience or an epiphany at the time, but what we at the Overview Institute have started to call a shift in worldview. And so I think that it's pretty important to realize that it may be something that happens over time. And I love Ron's term, an epiphany in slow motion, because that is echoed in the other interviews that I've done. Charlie Walker said something like, I came back with a mass of stored information, and it's going to take me some time to actually understand it. Edgar Mitchell talked about, even though he did have quite a stunning experience coming back from the moon, he told me he really didn't fully grasp it conceptually until many years later, and he was actually on an airplane at the time. So it is something that happens over time, and there is, Alex Howerton of the Overview Institute talks about the overview effect of time, and I think that is also true of our society as well as of the individuals who have the experience. It will take time for this insight to seep into the culture as well.
Right. So I think, and that seems sort of natural too. We're kind of hardwired to deal with the here and now, not take the longer view. We have to do that intellectually, but how many people actually understand intellectually they need to save for their retirement, but really don't get it until a retirement is looming. So we do sort of act in that way. You mentioned Edgar Mitchell, and I've been meaning to ask you something. That is the overview effect one gets, or the experience. I know it's going to be somewhat different from lunar orbit or on the surface of the moon than it would be from low Earth orbit. The moon is smaller. I could, you know, the pictures we see of the Earth from the moon, it's always small with stars around it. And I know it's that way from low Earth orbit as well, but it's not what we usually experience. Is that a different experience for those that go farther out?
Well, Mike, you're asking me, right?
Yes.
Because I lost you for a while there.
Okay.
Well,
so,
that was one of the startling insights that I had in writing the overview effect was, okay, it's not the same to go to the moon as it is to be in orbit, because when you're in orbit, the Earth pretty much fills your field of view. And the striking change in going to the moon is that suddenly you see the whole Earth. And that's one of the reasons I believe that the lunar program has had such a dramatic effect on the environmental movement, because for the first time we really were able to see the whole Earth and see it in the context of the universe. And I talked to Edgar Mitchell about this, and he agreed that, you know, going to the moon gives you the more universal point of view. But he also said something I think is very important for everyone to know, and I think, Ron, I'd like to hear what you think about this, but he said he felt the difference between astronauts who got an aha experience or some sort of change in their perspective and those who didn't was how open they were to it. So he seemed to feel that was almost as important as the difference between the orbital view and the lunar view. So certainly they are different. Gene Cernan said we really had two different space programs based on those two differences. But I do think it's so important, especially as we imagine a future in which ordinary people, as it were, will be perhaps taking these trips, that how open they are psychologically to what's going to happen is going to structure their experience very, in a very big way.
Yeah, so Ron, what would you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there definitely is a difference. I mean, this probably isn't completely accurate, but it's probably on the order of magnitude the difference between flying at 38,000 feet in an airplane to flying it, in low Earth orbit. That shift is probably equal to the shift between low Earth orbit and going to the moon. Maybe it's even greater at the moon. I haven't been to the moon yet. Maybe someday. But what's undeniable when you're in lunar orbit or when you're seeing the Earth from that vantage point where you see the whole disk of the Earth, what's undeniable is that it's a planet hanging in the blackness of space. When you're in low Earth orbit, the beauty of the planet, I think, is just captivating. It's mesmerizing, but it really, you don't get that sense all the time. And for me, there were moments where I did have the sense that I was looking at a planet hanging in the blackness of space. There's out on spacewalks, for instance, there were times where it was really obvious that that you're looking at that. And so it's almost like your brain has to extrapolate what you're seeing. Your brain has to see the curvature of the Earth, see the radius, if you will, and then extrapolate that image out to a greater vantage point to be able to get that awareness, that certainty of what you're actually looking at. And the background has a lot to do with it too. I mean, it was a lot easier for me to get that sensation when I was looking at the planet at night, when I had all the lights turned off in whatever spacecraft I was in, so that my eyes adjusted and I can see the Earth not against the backdrop of utter blackness. I could see the Earth against the backdrop of infinity. And that really, I thought, was a lot easier to get this sensation, to get this, to be aware of the reality of what you're looking at, which is that you are looking at a planet traveling through the universe.
Yeah.
And so what is undeniable from a lunar orbit takes a little bit of work in low Earth orbit.
Right. And pulling back is what does that, and that's the orbital perspective, basically. That's what you're talking about, is that when you pull back and you see the whole thing. I think one of the things, I don't know if you noticed this, Frank told me one time, I believe, about one astronaut on a spacewalk, could have been you for all I know, but who was struck by the fact that while waiting for something to happen, he looked around and looked down and saw stars between his feet. And that's really going to kind of force you to rethink where it is you are and what's going on there. Do you ever have an experience like that where it just shifted suddenly by that?
Well, I did this maneuver on my third spacewalk called the windshield wiper, where I was on the end of the Canadian robotic arm, and I got swept across a big arc across the top of the space station. And on the first sweep of this, it was nighttime, and my only task was to hold this 500-pound pump module, and so I had nothing better to do. So at the top of the arc, I turned off the lights on my helmet, and so it was a little eerie as I was rising up above, really slowly and methodically rising up above the space station, rising above all the lights of the space station into this utter blackness above. But when I did turn my lights off, that's when and my eyes adjusted, I could see clearly, the Milky Way and everything else, and I could see satellites whizzing by too, which for the first couple of seconds, I'm like, well, there's not supposed to be craft up above me here, but there were. There was another time where I was replacing a camera on the bottom of the space station, so the Earth-facing part of the space station, and I probably spent 30 or 40 minutes with my feet pointing away from the Earth. And it was about halfway through this thing where the visual of the Earth above me really started to take over, and I started to feel like I was upside down, even though obviously we all know there's no upside down in space. But no, I haven't seen the stars between my toes, but that's only because I never really looked. So
Yeah, exactly. But you're describing the same kind of a
yeah.
thing and how it matters. There are a couple of things from astronomy that I think are relevant to this too, and that is that we have pictures of the Earth taken from much farther away as well, and these are what the public experiences. So most of the time, those pictures of Earth from low Earth orbit are showing something incredible. And I've been looking at those pictures since they first came back in grainy black and white back in the 60s, I guess. And now they're incredible, but the ones that really strike me are the ones where you can see stars. And we get a little bit of that orbital perspective that you guys get in the overview effect. But we have pictures of Earth from as far away as the outer solar system, a recent one of Earth and Moon taken from Saturn by the Cassini spacecraft. And these are really humbling for those of us who have not had a chance to go into space. You know, it gives us some of that experience. But the other thing is that, you know, in astronomy, people look up and it's often said, oh, it's a humbling experience looking at the whole universe and realizing how small we are. And I don't have that experience, and I know a lot of others don't. It shows us that we're part of something bigger. Maybe this is some difference in the perspectives that I have, but when I see what we are a part of, I get an overwhelmingly positive feeling. And partly maybe because of the orbital perspective and so on. And that's part of what you're describing from up there too, that it's a little bit easier cognitively to make this shift. So,
But you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective.
absolutely. So, you know, what does it take? You know, this is an intellectual shift for those of us who don't get up there. The astronomy certainly helps, but not everybody goes out into a dark place and looks up and sees the Milky Way.
Yes. So what does it take to have an orbital perspective?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I mean, we need to look at things from a both a long-term perspective and a big picture perspective. It's a shift from thinking locally to thinking or thinking just locally to thinking globally. It's a shift from thinking about the short term, the next quarterly report, the next election, to thinking about the 20-year plan and beyond. It's the awareness that we are more interconnected than we realize on a day-to-day basis, that things that happen on one side of the world, good and bad, affect what happens on the other side of the world. It's not them over there, it's us over here, you know, here being Earth. And so that shift, you know, does not require going to space. And that's why in my book, The Orbital Perspective, I listed and told so many stories of people who had never been in space who were exhibiting this big picture view of the world. And you know, a lot of things become really crystal clear when you take that big picture view. You know, and another aspect of this whole thing is labels. You know, we talked about stovepipes and parochialism, and you know, we tend to label ourselves, we tend to label others, we tend to label groups, we tend to label cultures, nations. And what we do when we put those labels on ourselves and others is we box ourselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We set up barriers and boundaries to collaboration, barriers and boundaries that delineate who we will work with, who we will talk to, whose opinion we will value, whose position has any merit. And once we do that, we start to really limit the possible solutions to the challenges we face by putting ourselves in those boxes. And so the opposite of that is the orbital perspective, because when you zoom out to the orbital perspective, all those differences fade into insignificance.
Yeah. Well, let me quote from your book. One of the things that really struck me, because I could have written this myself, is exactly what led to the things that I do now, connecting people to get this experience. If there's one thing I've learned in my travels around the world, it's that people are people. There are more things that we share in common than things that separate us. We may be born in different countries, belong to different generations, speak different languages, but we are one species with the same hopes and dreams for our children, for our communities, and for our planet. And you know, when I first started traveling to places that a lot of Americans wouldn't necessarily go to because they're too different than what we have here, uh, I was struck by the fact that we had so many similarities, but after a while, my worldview changed, and I realized that when I find something that is really different between me and someone in Iran or Iraq or in India or in any other place, I'm really kind of startled, that we have a difference that is a basic difference. I no longer have this sense that there is a difference, and that the travel has made that kind of a difference, which is why we try to bring people together to know each other and so on, to bring
Right.
that type of orbital perspective to people as well. And you have worked in many countries, Rwanda and other countries where you have worked on clean water projects and other things as well. So you clearly have that perspective as well.
Yeah, we have a small world, but we have a big world out there too.
Yeah,
You
big
know,
inside.
we're rich in variation, but our core, there's, just like I said in the book, there's so much more that we share in common than those things that separate us. And what you spoke about in your experience, I think, really confirms that.
Yeah, yeah. So Frank, back to the idea of the orbital, the overview effect and the orbital perspective, and
Yeah.
it's both you and Ron have acknowledged that while the orbital perspective is the call to action, it's you experience the overview effect, and then you want to do something about it because you now have the orbital perspective and you want to share that with others. This is sort of how that has gone. But I note in your book, and this comes from not from your words, but from the second edition foreword by Kenneth Cox, who is a NASA futurist and engineer. You said that you identify, among other things, patterns linked with space experience, including an abiding concern and passion for the well-being of the Earth, an understanding that everything is interconnected and interrelated, a higher level viewpoint involving new awareness and new consciousness, and the recognized need for a stewardship perspective and a global participatory management of the planet. And that is the orbital perspective that Ron describes as well.
Well, one of the things I love about what Ron is doing uh, is that I have been saying for many years now, what we need on this planet is overview thinking. This experience the astronauts had, translated into everyday life, would change everything. It would change economics, it would change politics, it would change art. And I've made a few points about overview thinking. For example, there are no sides on a planet. And yet, on the surface, we are constantly dividing into sides, aren't we? We talk about polar opposites. And yes, the two poles are at different parts of the planet, but they're all part of the same planet. And all of this goes back to the metaphor that Ron has used, I've used, Buckminster Fuller popularized it. It's not just a planet hanging in space, which we've talked about. It's a spaceship. I think Ron talked about moving through the universe. We are all, and Ron has used this term, and I have too, we're all crewmates on this spaceship.
There's no
And the
passengers.
breakthrough, yeah, and well, if you think you're a passenger, we want to talk to you. We want you to join the crew, right? And the metaphor of the International Space Station, if the crew of the ISS acted the way human beings do on the surface, it wouldn't be there anymore. It would probably have failed by now. Now, the great thing about what happens to astronauts is they experience it rather than knowing it intellectually. And I do think there's the gap that we need to close. It may not be by sending people into orbit, but perhaps through virtual reality or other simulations of the experience that the astronauts had directly. But once this shift occurs, and Ken Cox talked about it, it can only be positive. The abiding interest in the ecological sustainability of the planet, the interest in humanitarian issues and world peace, these are the things we're all seeking, and as crew members of the spaceship, we need to have this shift happen. And I think I would add one thing, and I think Ron might agree, and you might as well, Mike. We're all trying to bring this about through slightly different perspectives, but it's somewhat urgent. It's not nice to know. It's not a good thing to know. Our future as a species really depends on getting this sense of unity that we lack at the moment.
Right, right. Well, and I think the orbital perspective informs us of that as well. Satellites make a big difference. And Frank, I want to mention something that I know these are new earbuds for you. The microphone on your cable sort of rubs against your collar, so we get a little bit of extra noise there. So yeah, if you hold it out a little bit,
I'll move it away. Is that better?
That's much
Is
better.
that better?
Yeah,
Okay.
but
I wouldn't want you to miss any of these words.
No, we're hanging on every one.
Okay, good.
No problem there, Frank. And so satellites, most people don't realize that NASA is the one that probably does more research looking back at Earth than looking out towards space or sending people into space. That a large part of the charges use space to examine Earth and to learn about it. And when you look at pictures from the many, many different types of satellites that are Earth-facing, you realize that we have learned an enormous amount and continually learn and monitor the planet. And that's where we can see most clearly what is happening with the climate, what is happening with different environments and everything else. That it's just undeniable. It doesn't matter if one person makes a snowball and shows everybody in one place because it's colder. We see the whole planet, and we see that thanks to these satellites. And so NASA and space informs us about the condition of the planet, and that sort of thing is easy to miss. You know, if you're not looking out the window of your car, you may not notice that there's a bus barreling down at you from behind. So you have to take a look around as well. So
well, it's a yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's a technological version of what we're talking about that has brought the planet together, and I call it the technological overview effect. And Ron has talked a lot about how his vision of how we can use the orbital perspective is real in some sense because of this interconnected nature of the planet. And I totally agree with that, Ron. I think you're exactly right. This is the moment in time when we can do what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we are really at a very unique point in history. Never before in history has it been easier to effortlessly, economically, seamlessly incorporate the ideas and the creativity of people from around the planet. And you know, when we zoom out to the orbital perspective again, what we see is that the internet has become the nerve center of spaceship Earth. And what it has the potential to do is to connect and combine discrete points of creativity, discrete points of effort into unified action. And you know, we've got about 5 billion people on the planet that at present are not connected to the internet. And these are 5 billion creative problem-solving people. And I think what we're going to find, you know, if we have the humility to embrace it, is that solutions to the problems that we face that we've never even considered are going to come from places we never heard of. And all we have to do is to be open to look for those ideas, open to accept those ideas, and incorporate them. And I think we're living in a really amazing time.
Absolutely, and I find that out all the time. I'm constantly learning because of the internet, which is the basis for what we do. Finding, you know, hearing about things that are being done in other places, hiring people in places where they're very much disadvantaged because they're extraordinary people. You know, I found lots of diamonds in the rough, and I say diamonds in the rough because they haven't had the opportunity that the three of us have to be polished by the education, the opportunities we have. But they're still brilliant. and they manage under far more difficult circumstances than we do. And if they had been here, they might have been another Ron Garan. Who knows? I want to stop for just a moment to say that anybody who is watching us now, I've neglected to mention that the Q&A app on the Google Plus Hangout page, you can put questions in there, and for any of the guests here or myself, and we will discuss them as well. So let us know your comments and your questions, and the Q&A app is on the home page for the Hangout. So anyway, but you know, this technology that gives us so many possibilities, like everything else, there's a trade-off. It's equal and opposite actions and reactions. The technology informs us and it allows us to have solutions, but at the same time, it seems it presents new problems as well. The anonymity of the internet is a problem on a more local basis. And now Americans hear about something going on in a country halfway around the world, and it frightens them because they don't understand it. And it also gives the ability for hackers and other things. So it works both ways. And technology, you know, used to be that if somebody's nuclear arms was a bigger club, and now we have other things. And this has been a discussion point since World War II. So how do we overcome that? We need to make sure that we have the ability and the foresight to use all of these things to overcome the problems that come along with them.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I think one.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Well, I was going to say, I think that one of the big ways that we tackle those things is together. We work together on this, and you know, technology is always going to have that that downside, if you will. That's always going to, you know, you could use any tool, any technological tool can be used for good or bad, or good things can happen from it, or bad things can happen from it. Here's a perfect example: the automobile. Right? I don't think we want to trade the fact that we have an automobile, but you know, people get killed every day in automobiles, and it is such a commonplace thing that we don't even hear about it on the news, right? It's you know, it's sort of seen as a necessary evil of our mobility, right? But if we were to zoom out and look at that from the orbital perspective, we would see that about 1.3 million people a year die in car accidents. That's the same. That's like wiping out the entire population of Dallas or Auckland or many cities around the world. And as a global society, would we actually put up with that? And the answer is no. I mean, if every year we lost an entire city's worth of population, we would do something about it. And so, you know, one of the things that we can do about it is we can look at the details, right? We can zoom into what we call in the orbital perspective the worm's eye details, and try and do things like improve traffic safety, build cars that can withstand crashes better, maybe, you know, more laws against drunk driving, you know, on and on and on. But if we zoom out and take a big picture perspective, you know, and we could do this together, we could build the infrastructure where instead of building cars that can better withstand crashes, we build cars that don't crash in the first place. We build cars that have, through the rapidly developing information technology, know where all the other cars are, know what the road conditions are, have sensors that react 1,000 times faster than a human can, and we create this infrastructure from a big picture point of view that could actually drive traffic fatalities to zero. But the reason why we don't do that is because it is beyond the capabilities for that level of infrastructure change for any one company, any one nation for that matter. It would require a global effort to come together to build the type of infrastructure that would take. And so, again, we tend to look at things short-sighted, and it would take a long time. So we tend to look at things from a very short-sighted point of view, a very local point of view, maybe a national point of view if we're stretching it. We're not looking at things at a global long-term view. But if we do look at things from a global long-term view, we can mitigate the negative effects of technology to a much greater extent than we are now.
And the International Space Station is the perfect example of how that can happen, because the U.S. couldn't have done it alone, and the Soviet Union and Russia couldn't do it alone. It just really did take everybody to do it for the good of the whole world. And when you do something for the whole world, it helps your own country as well. So it is not simply foregoing your own national interests or your own personal interests. It's a way of getting everybody to benefit by working together.
Right, and I wouldn't say it's a perfect example. I think it's a really, really good example.
Okay.
I think that, I don't think you're going to find a perfect example. But also, you brought up a really good point. And what enabled, the 15 nations of the International Space Station Partnership rightfully should take pride in their contribution to humanity. But you also have to understand that what enabled each of those countries to join the partnership in the first place was a conscious decision on their part that joining the partnership was in their best national interest. So in this case, the national interests of 15 nations aligned, and we created the International Space Station. And so, that is a factor. National interest is a big factor in doing anything international and doing things on a global scale. And it's something that you have to take into account.
Yeah, but from a human standpoint, it seems to me that some sort of personal interest, some sort of personal motivation, whether personal means individual or a nation, is always going to be there. The motivation may be I want to help other people, which is things that you and I do, we're motivated to do, but not everybody has that. Not everybody gets the same self-satisfying feeling from helping other people in other places around the world. But that is itself, there has to be something. That motivation has to be there. I think, it's just.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest reason why people don't help is because they don't feel like they can make a difference. And again, the reason why they don't feel like they can make a difference is they're taking too short of a time frame view and too small of a picture. If they actually extend out the horizon, if they look at things not just from a geographic extension of the horizon, but also in time as well, we do not realize how unbelievably powerful each and every one of us actually are. And so, if people realize that and take that into their perspective, how powerful they are, I think they'd be much more likely to contribute to the greater good. And I think a perfect illustration of this is an asteroid, right? If an asteroid was barreling down on the Earth, and it was going to wipe out every living thing on the planet, and we knew about it long enough out with enough time, we wouldn't have to call up Bruce Willis and have him blow up the thing out of the sky. It would be a fairly simple task to fly a small spacecraft out to meet the asteroid, and with the force equivalent of a feather, just give the trajectory of the asteroid a slight nudge, and that slight nudge would probably equate to hundreds or if not thousands of miles of mistress, just saving everything on the planet. And so when we look at things from that time frame, every action we take, every decision that we make has tremendous impact in the long term. We're nudging our global society, no matter how small this impact is. And so every act of goodness, everything that you do to make the world a better place, no matter how big or how small, if you look at it from the orbital perspective, which is this big, not only big picture view, but long time frame view, you see that it has a tremendous impact. And I think if people took that into their perspective, they'd be a lot more likely to make a difference and make contributions.
I do agree, and it brings up another point. But first, Frank, I think you were trying to get in there with us wordy guys. Did you have thoughts on that you wanted to share?
Well, I did want to add something. Of course, I'm just certainly in agreement with what you guys are saying. My colleague at the Overview Institute, David Beaver, talks about the overview effect as the missing piece in understanding the value of space exploration to date. Because whether we use the term overview effect or orbital perspective, we're talking about this global or planetary viewpoint and the importance of people really taking it on and seeing that, as Ron says, everyone who's involved can make a difference, can help to create this change that we're all talking about. Another thing I would say that Ron has mentioned, and which I definitely picked up in interviewing him for the book, there's a term that's pretty well known in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Ron talks about it, Edgar Mitchell talks about it, others talk about it, and it has to do with seeing the Earth as a beautiful, serene planet hanging in space, understanding it's one system, there's a unity and and coherence to it, and then realizing that down on the surface, people are dying unnecessarily. People are living in privation unnecessarily. That people are fighting over borders that you can barely see. And cognitive dissonance means you either have to deny that, somehow ignore it, or you must take action to change the situation, which I think is what Ron is calling for. And so we can't ignore what we've seen, either through the eyes of astronauts, through photographs, through videos. Now we actually are having real-time imagery piped to us from the International Space Station. We cannot turn away from this challenge. We actually, as a planet, have to grasp it. One of the things I would point out is what you were talking about, Mike. Self-interest can sometimes look like altruism in the sense that people can get great satisfaction out of joining a team on a global scale to make a huge difference. And I believe the world today, people are desperate for a global project, a global shift. And some people are joining negative representations of that because they're so drawn to something bigger than themselves. You know, Nicole Stott, when I interviewed her for the book, talked about what you said, Mike. Being on the International Space Station, seeing the Earth as a planet, it didn't make me feel insignificant. I felt more significant as part of this larger whole called the universe. So I wish we could get that over to people, that we're not insignificant. As Ron said, every one of us can make a difference, but only as part of a team. And it's just like a football team, a baseball team, any team. Everyone working together can have enormous synergistic impact.
Right.
So I just hope everyone can hear this message and join the team.
I think that's an important point. Let me mention, you know, the cognitive dissonance you mentioned. You know, we can no longer ignore things because it's in front of us is a very important point, I think, and probably one Ron would agree with, and others as well. It's as though the space programs have performed an intervention on those of us trying to ignore reality. They just took us out and said, you know, you're going to rehab here, like it or not.
Wake up, people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
I like that. I like the intervention analogy. That's great.
yeah, and you know, it occurred to me earlier with Ron, but it leads to what you were just saying as well, which is an important point, that individuals can have much more of an effect than they think. But it is those like Ron who create large projects that have infrastructures, and I'd like to think what we do with Astronomers Without Borders, where we connect people with others so that they can do things they had never imagined they could do. They may not want to travel to Pakistan, but they can get to know people in Pakistan, and this enables and really empowers individuals to have an impact on a larger scale and to feel that they're having an impact on a larger scale as well. And this, I think, does all come down to the effects of social movements, like you mentioned. It empowers individuals as a part of something that's much larger, which really does go back. You know, I look more at the world, as you've noticed in my comments, about how we are kind of hardwired through survival to take narrow views and this and that, but we are social animals that we sometimes don't recognize, and it is very natural for us to go with the herd. Well, some of us, like the three of us here, tend to wander away from the herd and try and find something else. But for the most part, we are social animals, and that's a very important motivation in itself. Ron said in his book, I believe that a collection of individuals is more likely than a collection of nations to make real progress towards solving our biggest challenges. And he gives many examples of hackathons and other things like that. And I would add that a sufficiently large number of citizens can also cause political leaders to change their behaviors and their decisions. So the real power is in people and social movements. Margaret Mead said something. It's not amongst the quotes I have written down here that I can read, but she said that individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think this is what she was alluding to. Ron,
And
you.
don't forget, too.
Yeah, Frank?
Oh, go ahead, Ron.
No.
No, I was only going to say that we have seen a change in how the world behaves in terms of the environmental movement. It's not accidental that the first Earth Day happened after the first moon landing, and those pictures were sent back. And the lunar photographs of the Earth really gave a huge impetus to the environmental movement. And today, that's really become quite mainstream. So we have to bear in mind that over time, the collective mentality can change, and it can happen around the issues we're talking about now.
Mike, I think you're muted.
This is what I do on a regular basis. Sometimes somebody always tells me, but yeah. So, Ron, I'm sure you have some thoughts on all this.
Well, there's a lot of different points going around. I guess maybe one thing we could just touch on real quickly is, and we've kind of talked around this, but we really didn't get to the meat of it, is we're not talking about two names for the same thing. There's not, the overview effect and the orbital perspective talking about the same thing. They're talking about complementary things. They're two sides of the same coin. As a matter of fact, I wrote the foreword to the latest edition of Overview Effect, and in the foreword described that if the overview effect is this transformation in perspective that people can have by seeing the planet in space and from space, then the orbital perspective is what you do with that. It's the orbital perspective is the call to action that occurs from the overview effect. And just like you don't have to be in space to have the orbital perspective, I don't think you need to be in space to understand the overview effects. I think Frank understands it very well, and he has not yet gone to space. And so I think, there's two sides to this, and I guess a big thing is we have this beautiful perspective now of our planet. We had the Earthrise photo, back from Christmas Eve, from Apollo 8. We have all this awareness in our global society. We have people who have actually been to space and can describe what that experience is like. And if that's where we leave it, what's the point? What's the point of saying, yeah, we've got this beautiful interconnected planet, we're all in this together, and then we just go about our daily lives as if we don't understand that, as if we look away, if we haven't had this intervention that you talked about. But the fact is, that's not reality. The reality is we live in a three-dimensional, interconnected, hyper-interconnected global society, and we live in one ecosystem. It's called Earth. And we have to live our lives within the reality. We need to live in the real world, and the real world is that. And so the orbital perspective is that call to action. It's the call to do something with that awareness. It's the call to do something with that perspective, and it's a call to make the sobering contradiction we see when we look at our planet from space between the beauty of our planet on one hand and the realities of life on our planet. To make that contradiction less and less, to strive to make life as beautiful on our planet as our planet looks from space. That's what I think the connection between the overview effect and the orbital perspective is. And Frank, if I've misstated anything, please let me know.
No, I think you first made the distinction, and I think it's a good one. I would add to it that I teach courses on communications, and I talk to people about the trinity of awareness, knowledge, and behavior. And that is to say, when you're a communicator, which is really what we're trying to do here, first you have to bring an awareness to a person of the issue, the cause, the concern you have. Once they have an awareness, you transmit knowledge that will help them act on the awareness. And only then can you really expect them to change behavior. I think we're trying to move along that spectrum right now. Um, there are those who are already on the behavioral end of the spectrum. There are those who really aren't on the spectrum yet. They don't have the awareness yet. Then there are others, like Ron talked about, where he's saying we really have the knowledge. We really know, for example, how to eliminate I don't know how many it was, million people who die every year in an automobile accident. Now we have to act on that as a collective. And so we need to move along that spectrum. And I do think that one of the challenges we have is that for all we've said, and one thing we haven't said that we all agree with is we are in space. Ron says you don't have to go into space to experience the orbital perspective, and it's true. We're in space. The planet is in space. It can't be anywhere else. But our experience every day is the same experience that our ancestors had 1,000 years ago. We think we're on a stable platform, two-dimensional platform. The universe is revolving around us. And we need to figure out ways for that experience to be more powerfully transmitted to our crewmates. And Ron said, I go back to Ron's metaphor, there are no passengers. I think there are people trying to be passengers. And that's who we need to chat with right now.
Yeah. You know, I think I need to rethink one of the things I always say you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you do have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective, and that's a good thing that we are all in orbit around the sun, so that's a good thing. So.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I do too, I also talk about Spaceship Earth and how we are all passengers on it, or crewmates, however you want to say it. And, you know, to me, people had this experience of looking at the stars. They didn't understand what this was about and what this meant in terms of the context. The technology has made a difference. We now know what our place is in the universe, and we know what these stars represent. But this is intellectual, and a lot of this is how do you get from that intellectual knowledge to the experiential knowledge that Ron has had. And the way I put it is that I believe by looking up at the sky, we're getting that overview effect. A large part of it is the fact that we are communicating with other people. Because when I have a telescope pointed at Jupiter and a friend in Iran has a telescope pointed at Jupiter just at a different angle, we realize that we're just in the same place on the larger scale, and that we are looking out of different windows from our spherical spaceship.
Yeah, the base of the triangle is pretty small in the cosmic perspective.
That's right. It's very, very small, and so we're just looking in different directions. We're on the same spaceship Earth. We all have a window that we can see, and we're looking out of different windows, but we're otherwise seeing the same things. So, and that is something which is experiential when you are having a star party, when you're looking at the same things with people in another place, just like we've had really brought to us by a group of students in Iran who started a program called Star Peace, where that border that Ron has photographed, that he could see from space, India and Pakistan, where they did this, had a star party where they had telescopes pointed from both sides of the border. They couldn't get very close to the border because it's so militarized, but they could see each other and talk to each other on their mobile phones. And when we do that from around the world, we're just taking, it's like one person's looking out the front of the spaceship and the other one's looking out the back, except that it's spherical, so there isn't any front or back. So that's what astronomy does for us. And and I think you've addressed this some too. Johnny Steverson asked, "Do you see more and more people slowly becoming aware of the effect?" And it's people like Frank and Ron who are making that possible, but also the technology. So do you see an increase in this, Frank, over the years? Are more people now do they get it now when you talk about this more than before?
Well, yeah, absolutely, Mike. One thing I would say is, and uh, going back to Ron's point about the infrastructure we have for transmitting ideas, I published the first edition of the Overview Effect in 1987. There was no internet. There was nothing like what we have today in terms of Facebook, LinkedIn, Google Plus, etc., to transmit an idea. Slowly but surely, the idea began to permeate society, and I would say that at this point, I witness a phenomenon that I find somewhat disconcerting, but also uh, positive, which is people talk about the overview effect without knowing where it came from. They take the term as being, well, that's just what it is. It was recently mentioned in the New Yorker in an article about using certain drugs to work with people who are um, terminally ill. And it was just used as the common parlance for the experience of astronauts seeing the Earth from orbit or the moon. I have a feeling that the term orbital perspective is going to go down the same road, and even more rapidly, maybe. So I do see more and more people having this understanding, and I think one thing I want to just mention that I think is significant, as we've been talking, I don't know what others have seen, but I believe we've been seeing live video from the International Space Station.
Hmm. Right.
And this is something we might want to talk about because we're talking about how do we get more people this feeling, and this kind of thing is an example of how we do it. So yeah, and this is why I'm optimistic. Again, we've talked about it. Infrastructure is in place for very rapidly moving people from awareness to knowledge to the change behavior that we're all seeking.
Right, right. Well, and this happens to everything, I guess, once things become a meme of some sort, to use more current parlance, people start using the term without thinking about it, and it's the same kind of thing that we do, I guess, that allows people to drive down the freeway without worrying about what's going to happen to them. You know, people ask me if I'm afraid of going to Iraq or something. I say, yeah, it's terrifying driving down to Los Angeles International Airport. It scares me. But I have some, track racing experience and things like that know what can happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Ron, you have any thoughts on Frank's comments there?
No, just
Yeah.
right in line. Right in line. I do think that this awareness is becoming more and more prevalent, and I think we're going to see a lot of benefit from it.
And I really think the time is right. There are so many good ideas where there's a piece missing, and sometimes it's just being in the right time, the right place at the right time. And I think you've kind of nailed that, Ron. I think this is the time for it.
Hmm.
Um, so I want to mention, of course, anybody has questions or comments, please put them into the Q&A app. And I learned from that as well that Anusha Ansari has been trying to join us and has had some sort of a problem. So hello, Anusha. Nice to have you watching. Wish you were here, and hopefully she will make it in here soon before we finish off here, because I'd love to get her perspective on this as a person who loves astronomy and has been to space. It would be great to have her. But so we do have another question, and I'm sorry if I pronounce the name wrong. Sanghavi Iyer. And I'm always fascinated by people around the world. It's cultures is my thing. I believe that's India, but maybe Sanghavi or however she pronounces her name will let me know. Ask about something that you talk about in the book, Ron. You have personal experience with the way we have Olympics that bring people together, so many nations to display their skills in the numerous sports. We can have a similar Olympics bringing together the common people from all nations, raising awareness and bringing health. Aptly, the key is we. And you've been involved in some national efforts, which is very similar to sort of an Olympic international event like hackathons and other things that reached out to people around the world and brought people in from all over.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more and more prevalent where you'll see events where you don't even know what country people are from. They're just working on whatever project there is to work on. And a good example is a hackathon or an event where people come together, usually over the course of a weekend, and they try and develop code, develop data visualizations, develop tools to solve problems. And a really good example of that is something called the International Space Apps Challenge. We're about to have another one here next month. And these events take place on every continent on the planet. So, one of them that I was involved with had 86 cities and 46 countries. There was almost 10,000 people, and it was amazing to watch a team come together. And by team, I mean a group of people in Kenya, a group of people in Nairobi, a group of people in San Francisco, a group of people in Sao Paulo, a group of people in Tokyo, come together to build an app on what crops farmers should plant in drought ridden regions of the world. And so it was amazing to see this in effect take place in action. Where the one team in Sao Paulo would hand off to the team in Nairobi while they got some rest, and they tag back up and have Google Plus Hangouts like we're having right now, where they assign things. And what was really interesting about that, not only the products that come out of it, the amazing tools and amazing solutions to problems, but the process itself to watch is pretty amazing. Because there are times where when the whole thing is over, and people are patting themselves on the back for a job well done, it was only then that they asked, well, what do you do for a living? What's your background? So tasks were not assigned based on having a specific diploma or going to a different, or being a member of this organization, or even being a member of a citizen of a specific country. Jobs were assigned or assumed based on passion, what they wanted to work on, and it was really an amazing experience. And so there's a number of things like that. There's a number of organizations. There's One Young World that I attend every year, which brings young people, I think they define that between the ages of 18 and 30, from every country in the world, and they bring them together to try, as a collective group, to try and solve the problems facing our planet. And again, you're in these groups, and the topic of what country you're from usually doesn't even come up. The topic is, what's your passion? How do you think this problem can be solved? What do we need to do? And it really is a very, very powerful infrastructure to solve problems.
Yeah.
Once you get outside of the boxes.
Exactly. And getting outside of the boxes can be as simple as flying from your own box to another box, but we can do that so well virtually now. We experience the same thing. There's one very popular type of event that we have and will have next month, there in April, which is Global Astronomy Month, that we organize, Astronomers Without Borders, where we have programs for everybody to participate in around the world. And one that's very popular is run for us. It happens to be somebody in Italy, an astronomer who has his own observatory and loves to do education and outreach. And so you watch what he is doing. He talks to you. It's like being in the dome by the telescope, and he is pointing it, and he shows you the picture that we have through it, because we can't look directly through the eyepiece. And people ask questions, and they talk with each other. And he may have 10,000 people, most of whom aren't taking part in the chat. And it's only after a while that somebody says, hey, where is everybody from? And the countries start going in there. And it just never even occurred to anybody to ask before that. And what's amazing is that they are all over. So you might think, well, there are more people in the US, or it's technological, so there'll be more there. No, it could be any country. And sometimes people are surprised by that. But after a while, we get used to it. Another thing is, too, that we say Astronomers Without Borders, and there are Engineers Without Borders that you're involved in, Ron, and many other Without Borders. I don't think of it that way. I've come to think of our Without Borders as not annihilating the borders, but we have redrawn the borders. What the border is, it's a subset. And instead of being the subset of Americans and the subset of Ugandans and the subset of Paraguayans, we have obliterated that, and we have now got the subset of hackers, or the subset of amateur astronomers, or whatever the interest is. So it's a group, but it gives us the ability to redefine the groups in any way we want to. We have infinite degrees of freedom now. And getting over the physical part of the world is it takes a little work, but we can bring people together based on a common interest in it. Now we have that group.
You know, if we can do that in space exploration, we could do it anywhere. Because space exploration, there is, I'd say 99.9% of all the technology used in the space program has a dual-use military use. And so,
Right.
and we're at the point now where we're completely open with within the international partnership of the International Space Station. We share data, we share research, we share lessons learned. So if we could do that in that realm with so much military application, we could pretty much do it anywhere.
Absolutely, yeah, and I encounter that too. I can no longer take any sort of gift to my friends in Iran because of sanctions and the other things, and that's, when I when I go there, I'm just going to mention this. You go to Iran, you may not have been there yet, but you're not with NASA, so now you can do it. And one of my favorite countries in the world. And Americans, we go there expecting one thing. People come up on the street, say, "Where are you from?" "Oh, we love America." And this is all people to people, not government to government. Extremely active astronomically. They've got one of the most active programs in the world. The conditions are not like what people think. There are complaints of gender inequality in the universities because the women outnumber the men by 50%. A lot of things, astronomy and theoretical sciences and things, mostly women. It's a lot of things that sort of break our ideas and knock us out of these paradigms that we have, just to shock us out of it. And it's sort of like
Right.
an intervention. Let's think about this a little bit differently here. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, Sanghavi tells me yes, she's in India. You'd think I wouldn't want to talk about countries since we're all here bashing the idea of doing that, but it's the cultures that I love and that.
Yeah, we don't ignore the fact that we all come from different countries. That's we need to view it as a richness, as we don't all have to be the same, but but we do all have to work together.
Exactly. We need to find the common ground, and that common ground may be bringing clean water to people in Africa. It may be looking at the sky. It may be science education. It could be many, many, many different things. So we just redefine ourselves based on what that interest is. Not everybody joins a hackathon. Not everybody has the ability to, but everybody has something they do want to join. Frank, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, well, one of the I just want to echo what you said. I mean, certainly those of us in the Overview Institute have found the same issue. We don't care, nor do we look that closely at where people are from. However, there is another way of looking at nations and cultures, and that is consistent with the overview effect and the orbital perspective concept, which is when you're looking at the Earth from a distance, what you see is unity and wholeness. You see the whole. You see the completeness and how it all fits together. When you're on the surface, you're looking at the same thing from a different point of view. They go together. When you come back, the countries don't disappear, and the cultures don't disappear, and the groups don't disappear. But what you've seen is a vision of possibility that it all works together for the common good. And I think that this to me is another aspect of the overview effect, which is you see diversity in the context of unity, and they both coexist. So we aren't really about wiping out borders and boundaries so much as making them work effectively for the common good, for the whole, and to stop being barriers and being actual facilitators, because the difference between these cultures when they come together, like on the International Space Station, can give you a much stronger team. It's that unity and diversity simultaneously that is the key to this whole next step that I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to say we're trying to take it. I'm going to say we're going to take it as a species because it's really our next step in evolution.
So, and just to piggyback on what Frank said, we're not trying to eliminate diversity. We're not trying to make everybody the same. But the downside of the groups that we're in, the nations that we're in, the cultures that we're in, is that what we tend to do is put those cultures, those nations, those peoples into boxes, right? We tend to do that, myself included. Every person on the planet builds a framework through which they view the world. And unfortunately, the way the world is right now, being a very, very complicated place, we tend to simplify the framework. So we put a simplifying filter through which we view the world. And the reason for that is because there's so many horrors in the world right now. There's so many, there's terrorism, there's war, conflict, poverty. The list goes on and on and on. But there's also love and compassion and self-sacrifice and creativity and ingenuity. And to make sense of this really complicated world, we simplify things. And when in the process of that simplification, sometimes, we have these cubbyholes that we put groups in and we put people in, and that builds these barriers and boundaries through which we don't cooperate. And so if through the diversity that exists in the world, we take specific groups and we say, okay, that's a group that I'm not going to deal with. I'm going to form an opinion about them, and there's nothing you can do to change that opinion. So I'm not going to work with them. I'm not going to collaborate with them. I'm not going to seek to find common solutions with them. Then that's a mistake. And so the first step, I think, is to identify for each of us to identify the framework that we view the world in and look for those barriers and boundaries and try and tear them down and try and not accept that's the reality, because it's not the reality. Things are not that. The reality of the world we live in is not that simple. We can't put whole groups of people or whole nations into any one specific box. There are value, and that even comes down, if we want to look at it from a U.S. perspective. Our political process right now does that tremendously. We have, political parties that put the other political party in these boxes, and they refuse to see any merit whatsoever in anything that the other side has to say. And so what they are in effect saying is, we are not going to work together to solve our common problems. Because if we show that there's merit, even a little bit of merit in your position, then we lose. Because if you're winning, we're losing. And it's an us and them, it's two-dimensional, and we don't live in a two-dimensional world. We live in a three-dimensional, hyper-interconnected world where things are not that simple.
Well, they are assuming it's a zero-sum game.
Right.
That somebody gains and somebody else has to lose. And that may be true in the stock market or some other things, but it's not true about life on Earth. Things can be better, and we know that. It's a
mindset of scarcity. It's fear. What drives that is fear.
Exactly, yeah. It's not scarcity. We know that it's not just taking from those who have and giving it to somebody else. It's taking the abilities of everybody in order to, and that experience of getting more, producing whatever it is, and applying that worldwide, applying it to other places. And again, as an amateur psychosociologist doing these things, I see that it is useful for people to draw those boxes on a survival basis, that you don't have to worry about something that's far away, you have to worry about what's here. But what we don't often recognize until it's too late is that sometimes there are other things to be concerned about. And the world, even the world you try to draw the box you try and draw around yourself, there are other things out there, and that by joining together, which we all eventually do, we can accomplish things, defeat things, solve things, and that's the history of humankind, that we do this. It's just that we always recognize it too late. It's always reactive. We respond to the problems after they've become dire. And we need to change that a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe to put it in a corporate perspective, or a corporate point of view, is looking at things like you described in this short-sighted way. We're looking at the next quarterly report, and we are trying to achieve the greatest market share at all costs, right? But maybe a better path by working together and cooperating, instead of gaining market share at all costs, we're trying to grow the market overall, and everybody benefits, and the whole world benefits. So it's zooming out to that orbital perspective, zooming out to that bigger picture, that where things, start to make sense and things start to become clear.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen that happen in the corporate world as well, where a trade organization forms and nobody will work together, so it's of no value whatsoever. And I'm talking about we're in astronomy, this is a niche market, and some companies, and it's very easy to see which ones because they are the most successful, have the broader view. Let's build the market. We've got another 7 billion people out there that we could sell to. And so that's a good example of that, and it's the visionaries that somehow see things a little bit differently, like you, Ron, and Frank, who recognize this. And we're going to be, and I know Ron is going to leave us a few minutes early, so I want to get to a couple comments and so on, and questions that I think are very good. One in particular, Frank, here comes the one we talked about before. That's enough to scare everybody. But I'm going to take this. The concept of one Earth, one skies comes from Ram Monty, is by definition universal. Is there any organization levering this to combat fanaticism? If not, how can we do so? Well, of course, my first answer is Astronomers Without Borders. That's the idea. This is not about combating fanaticism directly. It's about awareness. It's about education. It's about getting people to understand that a whole region is not the problem, or a whole group of people in some way. It's education and awareness about what the problem is and where it is. And so those people who are in a position to make some kind of a difference, which is society in general, can make a difference. There are places where we know some sorts of fanaticism have overcome the usual social situations of bad government or something else like that. But governments and everything else get their power from the people, first and foremost. And that is where the real power is. And that I think is the answer. And certainly the orbital perspective is part of that. I'm sure, Ron, you want to comment on that idea?
I think, yeah. I'm sorry, you were asking Frank first. So.
Frank, okay.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very relevant comment in that, as I mentioned to you in a private conversation, Mike, many of the groups we're talking about actually have a global perspective. They want their worldview to dominate the world. We are actually, the three of us here today, and those of us who support what we're doing in our organizations, we're offering an alternative, global, and indeed universal worldview. And I think very importantly, we're offering an alternative way to see the world we live in and the universe we live in. We are not in direct combat with these groups, but I believe that we're offering something better. And as I said to you, they're drawing young people to them because their view is global. And they are trying to spread that perspective as widely as we can. So what we're doing, I think, in an indirect way, is extremely important in relationship to that question that was asked.
Right, and Ron, so the global perspective, or otherwise said the orbital perspective,
yeah.
And
so,
how it affects these things.
Yeah, so as I said, we live in a very, very complicated world, and I think one of the greatest tools to cooperation and collaboration is to find the things that we agree on, to find the common threads, and to embrace those things, to start to work on those things, even with people that you have vast disagreement with. Unfortunately, not all groups will find a common thread. If a group's sole purpose of existence is the annihilation of everybody else who doesn't subscribe to a very narrow point of view, then it'll be very difficult to find a common ground. It'll be very difficult to find that jumping off point where you could start to work on the things that you don't agree on. But having said that, we have to be really, really careful because things aren't that simple. So even amongst really fanatical groups that are doing horrible things, there's going to be a spectrum of people within those groups. There's going to be the hardcore people that you just will not be able to reach no matter what you do, that have the sole purpose of destruction. And then you're going to have people who are on the other side of the spectrum who are there against their will. And then you'll have a whole spectrum in between. And so, and there's a myriad of factors affecting why people join those groups, like Frank talked about, but why they join the groups in the first place. What they see, the purpose of the group is. There's disagreement about it. So it's not as simple as just black and white as we tend to make it out. And so we have to take all of this into perspective, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to have a fully a full view of the whole situation. But it takes patience, it takes effort, it takes research, it takes being open to things, it takes humility, and those are the things that we need to enable this process.
Absolutely. So I think there are a lot of things that can make a difference, and I think there's no question. I think we made a good case for the global, for the orbital perspective today, Ron, and using the overview effect in that way. And I know, Ron, you have a hard deadline. You have to get off and get to another commitment, and your schedule is following you on social media. I just have no idea how you manage it, but maybe next year you'll get to have some sleep and stay at home for a little while. But you're doing incredible things, so I want to thank you. I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to bring on Liam to show something, our producer, to show something that we were looking at earlier in response to another question about streaming HD video from space. So
awesome.
You know what that's about too. So I want to thank you very much, not just for being here, but for everything you do. As you know, I'm a bit of a maverick, and I admire people. I never really have heroes, but you've really become one for me. What you're doing is my idea of what the world should be, and I will do anything I can to help with that too in my own little way.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it, and I can't say enough good things about the organization that you're with Astronomers Without Borders, and the work that you do, the unifying effort that represents. And one people, one sky, I think, is a perfect philosophy to have. And thanks, Frank, for all your insights and your friendship and guidance, and it's been a wonderful conversation. I think very powerful. I think.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for all you're doing.
And so, Ron, we'll let you go. Liam is showing your book now. We're going to show the website so people know where to go. It's not just about the book. It's about the effort. It's the initiative. Right. It's the whole thing, and the book is the introduction to it. So
right, and we like to say we call it the OP, the Orbital Perspective, the OP. So we like to say thanks for spreading the OP message of hope. So.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you very much, Ron.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye-bye.
The key is we.
The key is we, as Liam says. And
no, that's Ron. That's actually Ron's.
Well, well, you said it, but it is Ron's, and I agree with it 100%. And Liam Kennedy of imagebeam.com, our producer, a great guy I've known for a very long time, who actually went with me on one trip to Iran. You are going to show us your ISS above, and this is a perfect time because we have a comment from Mike Turney who says, how effective might a satellite beyond low Earth orbit? Okay, we're not beyond low Earth orbit. Streaming HD video 24/7 to people's smartphones and other devices of the Earth in space could build around it interactive applications which engage different cultures and geographies in real time. I am all for it. It's a fantastic idea, and Liam has a device which helps you do this. You don't have to have it, but there is streaming coming from the International Space Station all the time in low Earth orbit, and this does that and more, which I think fits in perfectly with the theme of what we're talking about here. So Liam, you do your elevator pitch here on tell us what it's about.
Yeah, let me see if I can respond to the question directly. So I think the question is coming from just what it is that you've been discussing. Does it actually make a difference to people's perspective of this orbital perspective if they have access to live, the key is live, video of the Earth from space. Now, I would assert that is absolutely the case. You know, I've got that from anecdotal conversations, specific conversations with people who have had access to the live video cameras on the space station that were put there by NASA early in mid 2014, and you've been seeing some of those images via the ISS above. I actually think the key, though, you know, you can have many different ways of showing those live views of the Earth. I think the key, in my experience so far, has been the fact that you're seeing images from the only human outpost that is permanently manned by humans in space. So when you're seeing these videos coming from the space station, especially when you see the rear view camera and it's showing the Soyuz spacecraft, parts of the space station, I think people are just getting really reminded that it's not just a static image that you can see from any old satellite, but it is actually something that is manned by human beings.
Right, and this is it's not necessary to have ISS above in order to see these. It's available to everybody.
They are, yes. So you're actually seeing the output of the ISS above behind me and on one of my TVs here. And you know, that's a little device that's built using what's called a Raspberry Pi. But you can view the live video from the space station. Just do a search on Ustream for HDEV. It stands for the High Definition Earth Viewing Experiment. So some very clever people at NASA put a really low-cost system together that has 4 cameras that's just positioned on the outside of the space station. The cameras are only visible giving out video when the space station is in sunlight, so for half of each orbit. But just look for it on Ustream. The advantage of using an ISS above is it knows when the space station is in sunlight, so it only bothers to push video out when there's likely to be a possibility of video being there.
Well, there are some other advantages as well. If you want to know when the International Space Station is above you, it's actually a really good awareness tool because it's visible line of sight many, many times a day. It's just that we can't see it during the middle of the night or during the daytime, but it does show that. And
I mean, what I find is that when people get to realize, oh, the space station, you know, it doesn't just come over those few times a month when it's visible, just after sunset or just before sunrise, but it's literally, you know, in your sky 5 to 8 times every day. And I have it, I know this is the info I get back from people who use it. When people are reminded that this space station is in their skies so frequently, I've got to say, the experience I have from them is that they're connected to the people in space. They feel an experiential sort of connection with those people.
Right, so, and going a little bit farther out, Ron Rosano reminds us that the Deep Space Climate Observatory, which has, of course, more important than the name, is the acronym Discover DSCOVR, Deep Space Climate Observatory, is much farther out. I think it's beyond the moon at 1 million miles or something like that, and I don't really remember. But it will be sending back still images soon, and that will be another perspective that we haven't really had. So, so that's going to be great as well, even though it won't be this great video.
Yeah, so that's the one that will have a full view of the Earth at 24/7. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. I think, and to answer that other question, the question that we're answering, I think it would be brilliant. We can't have enough ways of viewing our space, our place in space, our place on the Earth live. You know, the more we have, the merrier.
I don't think NASA really understands what they have with those cameras that are somewhat experimental there. This is the potential is unbelievable, and Liam is working with them. We're trying to help them recognize the potential they have for everybody there.
Well, the problem that's happening, is the problem to solve, is the fact that those cameras are slated to be removed in 2016. They only had a space on the station up until 2016, so there is nothing currently to replace them. And
Well,
I hope to be making a difference with that. So
well,
with your
maybe.
help, with
Great.
Frank's
That's great.
help.
Yeah, I
I,
think we
I'd
should.
like to help.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would
Well,
just say, Mike and Liam, since the very first days that I started doing book tours and talking about the overview effect, almost every time somebody in the audience would raise their hand and say, I really think it would be great if we had a camera in orbit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we could beam these images back down to the Earth. And we're now getting very, very close to making sure that that happens, and it just streams into the consciousness of the world. So it's very, very important, and I hope we can do much, much more with it.
Well, we may have collectively, we on this program have the ability to start a social movement that will, if there can be huge social responses to TV programs being canceled that can save them, maybe we can keep a camera on the International Space Station.
Let's do it. I
Yeah.
just think, let's do it.
We've got the chance anyway. I've been speaking with the right people at NASA, so we just got to put the right proposal together to
Well,
case this.
let's not name names too much here.
No, well, anyway, no,
So
no, I'm not naming people. It's just organizationally. There is a recognized approach to actually put proposals together. So we have an approach.
As is easy, very easy for me to do, and this could go on for hours. I always run over in my own great discussions with incredible people like this, but we're kind of slated to go off the air here, and this being online, we don't have to worry too much. But I think it's probably time to wrap it up. And Frank, I want to thank you, and Liam maybe can show Frank's book once more, and perhaps the website for the Overview Institute, which is working to bring the idea through simulations or any other type of education to people around the world to, in a way, get the experience in some small way that astronauts do to help get that little switch to turn on in people's minds. And I also want
to thank you, Mike.
Well, thank
I
you.
just wanted to thank you, Mike. And as you mentioned, you're a founding member of the Overview Institute.
Yes.
And as we discussed, I can't do as much alone as I can do with you and the other colleagues I have at the Overview Institute. And I just want to thank all of them for everything they're doing. We're currently working on creating some short videos to help build this awareness of the importance of space exploration, and we're constantly looking at new ways to do that. So, and you know, Astronomers Without Borders, you're our siblings, you're our cousins. We're all working on this together. So thanks very much, and thanks to Liam for what he's doing too.
Absolutely, and I will get you a look through a telescope at some amazing things, and you can get me into space. How's that?
All right.
Okay.
Let's do that.
I also want to thank Anusha Ansari for trying her best. We don't know what happened. There was some sort of failure of technology here. I don't even know where Anusha is in the world right now. I know her schedule is changing all over the place. So, but I know she's watched. Anusha, we miss you. Anusha would have added a very important dimension to this as fourth private explorer to visit space, first astronaut of Iranian descent. You may understand how I got to meet her, and co-sponsor of the Ansari X Prize, awarded in 2004 for the first launch of a reusable, privately funded spacecraft capable of carrying 3 people into space twice within 2 weeks. Also has her own foundation, the Uhura Foundation, and she's an evangelist for space exploration and tries to inspire young people especially girls, to pursue their dreams around the world. And she quotes Gandhi, "Be the change you want to see in the world." It would fit right in. Anusha is also inspired by astronomy, I know, and I have had her at some big telescopes. That is her thing. So perhaps we can, this also, Liam is showing Anusha's book, My Dream of Stars, From Daughter of Iran to Space Pioneer. And so if you want to hear some of Anusha's viewpoint, I highly recommend her really wonderful biography, uh, very much. So I hope you will see that. And I'm also very proud to say that Anusha is a member of the board of trustees of Astronomers Without Borders, and a very important one there. So I thank Anusha in absentia. I'm sorry we couldn't get you in somehow, Anusha. We missed you. I hope to talk soon. And to everybody who's been watching and everybody who watches this in the archives, it will be available on YouTube, and we will link to it from our website. Hopefully, others will as well, so that you can spread this around. If you enjoyed the program, share it with others and let them have a chance to see these ideas as well. And until then, thanks to everyone for watching. And if you're inspired by any of this, check out some of these organizations. And there's always Astronomers Without Borders as well, bringing you this program, One People, One Sky. Our biggest month of the year is Global Astronomy Month in April, so you can check that out as well, with programs for everyone. Join in one of the online observing programs or something else. So thank you all for joining us, and for now, good day or good night, wherever in the world you are.